Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to One Police Plaza. For those of you who were here yesterday, of course, welcome back again for another important announcement. We are here with a number of NYPD executives, as you can see, sitting down at this panel. This will be a very comprehensive conversation and a lot of information that you can take with you to give to your listeners and your viewers. We're going to discuss the work the members of this police department have worked on very, very hard for several months to make a difference in this city. We're going to be talking about the NYPD's formation of a summer violence reduction plan that they implemented. Today we're going to give you and share the results of that plan. There are three of our executives that will be presented by the police commissioner to speak, but after that there will be other executives that you see here on the panel that will answer any other questions for you. After the presentations, there will be a Q&A. We're going to keep it on topic, basically. And then we'll take it from there. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the Police Commissioner of the City of New York, Keishant L. Sewell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're joined today by First Deputy Commissioner Edward Caban, Chief of Department Kenneth Corey, Chief of Crime Control Strategies Mike LaPetri, Chief of Detectives Jimmy Essig, Chief of Patrol Jeff Madry, Chief of Transit Jason Wilcox, and Chief of Housing Kathy O'Reilly, and other NYPD executives who will provide information and overview of the department's work this summer. On May 1st of this year, the NYPD implemented our Summer Violence Reduction Plan citywide. This multifaceted plan called for increased, localized deployments of officers in precincts, transit districts, and housing developments that needed them the most. It enhanced the work of our field intelligence officers, our gun violence suppression division personnel, and our neighborhood and youth coordination officers. It made our joint interagencies operations with our partners more effective and efficient. And its flexibility in this approach allowed us to quickly and successfully adapt to shifting crime conditions. We said we would face challenges head on, and looking back at the last 4 months through the Labor Day weekend, our department is doing what it said. We saw the rapid proliferation of illegal guns on our streets. We targeted the people brazen enough to carry and use them. From May 1st through Labor Day, gun arrests increased from last summer, with a corresponding decrease in shootings during the same time period. And importantly, this meant fewer shooting victims in the summer of 2022 than we had last year. One person shot is one person too many. And murders across the 5 boroughs this summer were down from 2021. These numbers represent real people and families. We all know how critical the transit system is. From May 1st through Labor Day, crime in transit is down to pre-pandemic levels, a consequence of increased, concentrated deployment in our subway stations and on our trains. As ridership increases, we expect to see these declines continue. We remain focused on fighting increases in other critical areas as well: robberies, assaults, and burglaries, and notably grand larcenies, in which frauds and scams represent significant numbers. Overall, arrests were up in the past 4 months, and arrests for major felonies rose more than 25%. All of our public safety efforts are coordinated, decisive, and focused on the singular aim of making our community safer. But as we've been saying all along, we cannot do this alone. We still continue to engage our youth with programs and other community outreach. But while we are turning a corner in important areas, it is absolutely vital that we do so with the full support of our community and law enforcement partners. And we don't intend to let up, because we can't. The NYPD will never stop fighting for the streets, subways, and neighborhoods, and for all New Yorkers. We will always continue to put victims first, and we will keep squarely on the focus of people we serve. Now, Chief of Department Ken Corey will provide additional details about our work over the past 4 months. Chief Corey?
Good afternoon. So earlier in the year, when we set out trying to put together a plan on how we were going to combat what at the time was still rising violence in New York City, and the team all sat down and we approached it pretty much the same way we approach every issue at Comstat each week, and that's with a series of questions. What's the analysis? What's the plan? And then ultimately, what are the results of the plan? So when we looked at what violence and what drives violence in New York City, typically in the summer months, we see that 80% of shooting incidents in New York City occur in less than half of the precincts. So less than half of our 77 precincts account for more than 80% of the shootings that happen. And then we drilled down a little further and we found that 42% of those shooting incidents actually occurred between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. And refining that a little more carefully, 18% occurred between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., which also coincides with our shift change when our 4 to 12 shift gets off and our midnight shift comes on. We also knew that we were going to face a larger than normal number of retirements, as a very large class that was hired on July 1st of 2002 became eligible to file for service retirement 20 years later. So the challenge being, how do we keep more officers in the street to help us implement this plan? So the plan broke down into a few things, and as the commissioner indicated, it launched on May 1st. So first and foremost, in every borough, there was a individual in the rank of inspector who was designated the violence reduction coordinator, except the Bronx. The Bronx actually got 2 violence reduction coordinators. And it was their job to move these additional resources that we were shifting around in real time as conditions dictated. So they were on the ground, and when things needed to be moved from one place to another, oftentimes in minutes, they were the ones tagged with doing that. Our supplemental deployment plan that we had initially started in February increased to where we were turning out 300 officers a night, 7 nights a week, that were typically not assigned to enforcement duties. And they were being sent out to hotspots. So my office, working with Chief LaPetrie's office, we would look at where the intelligence told us that things were heating up, where we needed to put those officers out on foot posts, and they were put out typically 2 dozen at a time into any particular precinct to try to suppress violence with high visibility foot patrols. In those same precincts, we started bringing in several cars off of our midnight shift 3 hours early. So they were coming in at 8:30 at night instead of 11:30, and then remaining out, not coming in at the typical end of the 4 to 12 shift, but actually remaining out on patrol and in designated zones where things were flaring a bit, to again provide that rapid response, but also the high visibility patrol to act as a deterrence. We shifted a lot of officers to work later hours. So our neighborhood coordination officers, for example, and our field intelligence officers were all working either the 4 to 12 shift or even a little later, a 6 at night to 2 in the morning shift. Why? Because that's when more people were out in the street, and that's when we needed them out there. So we had them work later in the summer. Our youth coordination officers not only shifted to a little later hours, like starting at noon and working till about 8 o'clock at night, they were sent out to parks and playgrounds every day to create a safe space for people to bring their children to play, knowing that youth coordination officer was going to be there on post in that playground. Our strategic response group was shifted out into those same hotspot areas to supplement the patrols. Something that we had never attempted before. We have certain summertime commands or certain commands in the summertime that require additional resources. New York City is surrounded by water. We have beaches. People like to enjoy our beaches. So every summer we have to increase the number of officers in Coney Island, in Rockaway, and at Orchard Beach. Only this year, instead of taking those officers from patrol precincts, as we had done in the past, and quite frankly, we typically took them from the precincts that had more officers, which were our busier precincts, and sent them out there. Those details were staffed with officers coming from administrative assignments, or sometimes referred to as desk duty, from this building. So the patrol officers stayed on patrol in the precincts where they're normally assigned, working with the communities that they've come to know so well and where they're so sorely needed. And then there was our multi-agency task force that we put together, working with other city agencies such as the fire department, building, sanitation, Department of Health, and so many others, that we put together a team to work in each borough each of our 8 patrol boroughs all weekend long to target those hot spots where violence not only tends to occur, but places that plague a community with quality of life complaints around noise, parking, disorderly groups, unlicensed sale of alcohol, and some of these places have persisted for years. And in the past, we went it alone. The police department would go in, we'd issue summonses, we'd get some temporary relief, and then they'd start up again. And so this summer, we put together those multi-agency teams. They were used 160 times over the summer. And many of those locations that they went into are now shuttered for good, and that they will no longer disrupt those communities. And this all came down at the end of the day to really intelligence-driven deployment, getting an understanding of who is shooting at who. And sometimes that's done through more enhanced investigations into incidents of shots fired where no one is hit, so we don't record a shooting, but clearly someone is shooting. And even though we may not be able to put together a case to the satisfaction of a prosecutor, our officers know who drives violence in their commands. And they can look at a clip of video and see somebody shooting a gun in the street and say, I know who that is. That's so-and-so, and he's affiliated with this particular crew. And that crew, we know, fights with this crew. So now we know we need to rapidly move officers over to the other side, because that's where the retaliation is going to come, and it's going to come fast. And that's where those violence reduction coordinators really played a key role in taking that intelligence that was developed oftentimes in minutes by detectives at the scene or through the field intelligence officers in the precincts, and making that intelligence actionable, shifting resources around very quickly in order to combat the shootings. So I went through the why with the analysis, and then I kind of gave you a broad overview of what the plan entailed that we rolled out this past summer. And Chief Petrie will now be very happy to discuss the results of the plan.
Good afternoon. So this data is going to be from the time frame of May 1st, when the summer initiative started, to Labor Day, September 5th. So across the city, shooting incidents were down 14 out of the 18 weeks this summer. They were down 19%, or 132 less incidents, with 137 fewer people shot compared to last year. This was down 49%, 269 incidents, with 344 less people shot than the summer of 2020. The Bronx, Northern Manhattan, and Southern Queens have seen the steepest double-digit declines in shooting violence this summer. Murder was also down 13%, or 23 victims this summer, with the largest decreases being in the Bronx and Northern Brooklyn. Since the lion's share of resources went to the Bronx, I'd like to talk specifically about the borough of the Bronx. The Bronx led the city in shootings last year, and that trend continued this year for the first 4 months. 18 weeks later, the Bronx leads the city in shooting reduction. In fact, the Bronx leads the city by all the other patrol boroughs combined. I'm sorry, geographic boroughs combined. And just some of the highlights. 69 less shooting incidents in the Bronx for a 29% reduction. The 4-2 precinct, 15 shooting incidents for the summer versus 36 from last year, a 58% decline. The 4-7 precinct, 11 shootings this summer compared to 26 last summer, also a 58% decrease. Gun arrests continue to climb through the summer of 2022, where we see an 8%, more than 100 gun arrests this summer compared to last summer. Almost 1,500 illegal firearms taken from those arrestees this summer. That is at a 27-year high, as is the year-to-date gun arrests. And again, we need to talk about who we're arresting with being in possession of an illegal firearm in New York City. Almost a quarter of the individuals, as the year data also shows, are previously convicted felons. 17% of individuals arrested with a gun this summer have an open felony. When we look at these individuals, again, unfortunately, about 80% of the individuals arrested with a gun are walking around today. We had last year, and this trend continues, last year we had over 250 people that was arrested for a gun that had an open gun. That's three times, 220% the amount that we saw in 2019. Arrests for 7 major crimes for the summer, 25% higher than last summer, with a 27% increase for the year. Both the summer and the year, 7 major arrests are at a 21-year high. Murder arrests, 361 people have been arrested for murder this year, up substantially from last year. Shooting arrests, over 800 people have been arrested for shootings this year, up substantially from last year. When we look at, and I will take you back to last year's full year, we've had 80 people arrested for a shooting last year that had an open gun case when they got arrested for that shooting. That is four times the amount that was in 2019 when there was only 20. That's a 300% increase of people that we are arresting for a shooting has an open gun case. Chief Corey mentioned quality of life. In the summer months, we do see precursors when it comes to quality of life offenses. Almost 30% of our shootings in the summer months have an indicator of a quality of life issue prior to that shooting. We were at our highest levels this summer of issuing quality of life OAT summonses than 5 years. Basically, you have to go back 5 years to get a higher number. What were the two most common summonses in 2022 summer months? Unlawful consumption of alcohol, up 12,000 from last year, and public urination, up almost 1,500 from last year. With the rise in index crimes this year in the summer, we took a hard look of deployment and also who are we arresting. It's the same pattern of the gun arrests. We are arresting for robbery previously convicted felons that have preyed on New Yorkers many times before our arrests this year. 26% of people arrested for robbery this year has an open felony, and 25% are previously convicted felons. Less than 20%, less than 20% of our robbery perpetrators this year are incarcerated. Youth-related victimization and also arrests continues to plague New York City. We talked about 137 less victims of a shooting this summer. Unfortunately, shooting victims between the ages of 10 and 17 rose, as did perpetrators between the age of 10 and 17 rise in regards to shootings. 13% of our identified shooters this year, 13%, are under the age of 18. That's a 183% increase from 2017. The victimization, we're at the highest levels that we've ever seen, not even close when it comes to our younger victims. So those are things that, again, we continue to focus on, as the police commissioner and the chief of department mentioned. Thank you very much.
Just adding one thing, one statistic to what Chief LaPetri gave out on the juvenile shooting victims and shooting offenders. 20% of the people that we have arrested for a shooting that are under the age of 18 have a prior gun arrest at the time of their arrest for the shooting. So 1 in 5 have been arrested with a gun before they shot someone.
We'll have Chief Essick to go over some noteworthy investigations.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd just like to update you on some few notable cases recently. The first one occurs on Sunday, September 4th, an attempted rape at East 4th and Avenue D, which is the walled houses in Lower Manhattan. Our victim is a female who at 9:40 a.m. walked across the street to purchase coffee. On her way back, a male approached her, stated he was security, that he helped elderly get to their apartments. Our complainants and perpetrator enter and exit the elevator. The male then displayed a folding knife, pulled down the victim's pants, and attempted to rape her. She was able to fight him off, but he fled with her phone and $20. Investigators from Manhattan Special Victims were able to ID that perpetrator as Rohel Figueroa, male 30 years old, of 580 Blake Avenue, Brooklyn. He has 8 prior arrests: grand larceny in 2019, a robbery in 2019, criminal obstructing breathing in 2018, sale of marijuana in 17, patronizing a prostitute in 17, possession of marijuana in 16, and a robbery in 2006. We're asking for anyone who sees this individual to call 911 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-577-TIPS. We want to get this individual off the streets before he strikes again. Second incident I'd like to talk about occurs on Saturday, September 3rd at 5:30 p.m. Uniformed police responded to a gunpoint robbery at 2nd Avenue between East 91st Street and East 92nd Street. Our complainant states he was bumped from behind by a dark vehicle. 2 persons exited that vehicle, told him to get out, and view the damage. When he stated he was going to call 911, one male displayed a firearm. The victim then stepped on the gas and fled towards 2nd Avenue. The vehicle pursued him south on 2nd Avenue, crashing into him several times. The last crash occurred in front of 1751 2nd Avenue. One perpetrator then exited his vehicle, displayed a firearm, and removed a black bag containing at least $9,000. This is still a very active investigation, but this is what I can update you on. The perps fled in that black auto to East 87th Street and Lexington Avenue, where the vehicle was recovered and was processed by our crime scene unit. They are seen hiding under a car and in a garage, where they eventually picked up by what we believe is an Uber. The auto they were driving is a black Mercedes, which was stolen out of Suffolk County a few days prior. That firearm was dumped into a trash can and carted off by sanitation. Detectives did an excellent job of tracking down that sanitation truck and finding out where they dumped the garbage. After an extensive search through that garbage, we were able to recover that Glock 9mm handgun. Again, we're asking for anybody with any information on this to call Crime Stoppers. The next robbery I'd like to talk about is the robbery of a post office, which occurred on September 6th at approximately 7 a.m. at 1163 Castle Hill Avenue in the Bronx. Our complainant is an employee of the post office. She gets dropped off there by her husband. As she was unlocking the door, she was approached by a male wearing a Squid Games mask and gloves. The female screams and is pistol whipped. Her husband, hearing this, returns, at which time the perpetrator points a gun at him, stating, "Don't be a hero." The perpetrator enters the post office, removes in excess of $110,000 from a safe and an unknown amount of money orders and a printing machine used in making those money orders. The perpetrator enters a white Honda Odyssey with unknown plates at 7:15 a.m. and flees the scene. He is accompanied by an unknown male who is driving that white Honda. Surveillance video shows him in the vicinity at least 45 minutes prior to this incident. This case is being investigated by a joint bank robbery task force and the U.S. Postal Inspections. I'd just like to update you on 3 citywide robbery patterns that account for at least 86 robberies throughout the city since late June and early July. Although each of these patterns is unique in its own right, they are all similar in that they use numerous stolen cars, motorcycles, or scooters, and they change the plates during the commission of their crime. All involve a large number of individuals who break into smaller groups to commit these violent robberies. In each of these patterns, we have made multiple arrests or ID'd perpetrators, but other members continue to commit these crimes. And finally, in each of these patterns, we have seen multiple robberies committed in a short time span and in close proximity to each other. So I'll give you some examples. What we call citywide pattern 79, a commercial gunpoint robberies involving at least 27 cases in New York City and multiple others in Nassau and Suffolk County. On August 29th at 3:50 a.m. in the morning, members of this robbery crew carjacked a Honda Civic in Park Slope, Brooklyn. At 4:45 a.m. at a 7-Eleven on Union Turnpike in Queens, they did a gunpoint robbery. At 5:15 a.m., a short while later at another 7-Eleven, they do a gunpoint robbery. An hour later, they hit 2 more times in Nassau County, where 2 of the 3 perpetrators were apprehended. One was a juvenile. The second perp is a Rakeem Brooks, male 18 years old, who has 78 prior arrests, including 7 times for robbery and 1 time in this pattern. A citywide 82, our second pattern, is at 34 cases since July 14th. These are 2 males on the scooter, force gunpoint robberies, taking jewelry and money. They use these scooters, motorcycles, to ride on the sidewalk, dart in and out of traffic to terrorize unsuspecting victims. An example of how they do this, on August 5th at 3:10 p.m. on Sedgwick Avenue, the Bronx, they hit. Again on Sedgwick Avenue at 3:15 they hit. They then moved down to the South Bronx on 138th Street at 3:45 they hit. And again at 3:50 on 152nd Street. On August 27th, they hit at 12:20 at the Guggenheim Museum at 89th Street and 5th Avenue. Then move on to Manhattan, where at 4:30, 4:32, 4:33, and 4:35 they commit numerous robberies before fleeing after Good Samaritans intervene. And finally, we have citywide pattern 88, which is a 25-case pattern. Investigation reveals that these individuals, ranging in age from 16 to 21, would pull up in an auto, carjack another auto, and then use that freshly stolen auto after changing plates to go on robbery sprees. An example of how brazen and vicious these individuals are is what occurred on Monday, August 22nd at 10:40 a.m. at 100 D. Craft Avenue in the Bronx. A livery driver was answering a call at that location. 2 males entered the cab and at gunpoint ordered him out of the vehicle. A third male blocked his auto and with an unknown vehicle, and he also displayed a firearm. They took the victim's black Honda, 2 cell phones, and these 3 perpetrators, using that black Honda, after which they switched the plates, embarked on a reign of terror in the Bronx. They hit at 6:45 a.m., 7:35, 7:45, and 7:55. These individuals exited their vehicles, displayed knives, and forcefully removed property from helpless victims. On August 23rd, the next day, they hit again at 10:25. These robberies culminated in our attack on the off-duty police officer at 10:50 a.m. We believe these robberies are being committed by a street gang who call themselves the 1300 Crew, based out of the Morris Heights section of the Bronx. We have 8 ID'd members, but know there are many others associated with this crew. During the course of this investigation, we were able to make 5 arrests on various incidents. They include a Chad Gardner, male 19 years old, with 6 arrests, one of which was a robbery in this pattern. A Hassan Flores with 1 prior arrest, including a gun in this pattern. A 16-year-old for the robbery in this arrest, and a Malik Jones, who has 21 priors, including 3 previous pattern burglaries. And then lastly, last week, O'Shawn Logan, who we arrested and was being charged in the robbery of the off-duty police officer. Investigations continue on this incident and on the others, and we expect to make more arrests shortly. With that, we'll take questions.
Questions? Paul Corral, CNN.
This was for Chief Essig. In the car crash robbery of the Upper East Side, you mentioned that he had $9,000 in cash. Any idea why he was carrying around so much cash?
We spoke to him. He says he has brothers who own a bodega, and they're buying cars, and they like to have cash on them in case they see a car to buy a car.
And it's not clear yet whether the robbery was him at all or not.
Well, he was specifically targeted. You can see from that the video. He is targeted. They hit his car. They continue to follow his car. So we know it wasn't a random attack.
Tony DeStefano, Newsday.
Yes, for Commissioner Stoll or Chief Corey. It's been pretty dramatic in terms of the reduction in violence we've seen since May to now, with the shootings down and homicides down compared to a year ago and even 2 years ago, when we had dramatic increases. However, the other 7 or 6 major felonies are at a pace of increase throughout the year. They're about 35%. Last year at this time, we were down like 1%, almost 1%. What are you going to be doing? What's the plan to go after the other 7 or 6 major crime categories? You're going to be redeploying some violence reduction efforts? What's the plan?
So it's several-fold, right? So unsurprisingly, many of the robberies, and you mentioned robberies specifically, so many of the robberies happen in the same areas where we take shooting violence. We do have a nearly 28% increase in arrests for robbery this year over last year. What's frustrating our efforts and where we really need the help is from the rest of the criminal justice system. When Chief Essig is talking about a guy who's 18 years old, involved in a large robbery pattern, and has been arrested 78 times prior. He's 18 years old. He's been arrested 78 times. How many hundreds of New Yorkers has he victimized? And yet, he keeps being released only to go back and victimize others. Chief LaPetra will give you some statistics on the recidivism of
Yep.
robberies, but it is sky high.
Yeah, so
People
Tony,
commit robberies, we arrest them for robbery, they're released, they commit more robberies.
And to this point, when you see we have an increase in arrests, but crime reductions aren't immediately happening, exactly what Chief Corey stated, we need the criminal justice system to work with us. So Chief LaPetra can go over some recidivist numbers for us.
yeah, and just a little bit more on the criminal justice system. Less than a quarter of our robbery arrests this year has had a bail set. In 2017, that was over 42%. So, I mean, we're arresting these individuals and they are getting out to commit more robberies. The other thing that we're focused on is, we always talk about arrest to shootings, arrest to murders, but we also look at arrest to 7 majors. So about 45% of our robberies this year have a arrest attached to it, or somebody is presently wanted for it. And that is also at the highest levels that we've seen before. On multiple perp robberies, 43% of our robberies this year involve multi-perps. That is up substantially from 2021. 2021, 32% of our robberies were multi-perp. Gunpoint, 17% of our robberies this year are via gunpoint, compared to 14%. So when you have the multi-perp robberies, as Chief Essig alluded to, those are complex cases, number one. also the amount of discoverable evidence that has to be turned over. These are very serious crimes that multiple officers respond not only to the scene, but are doing canvasses for perpetrators, sometimes across 3 patrol boroughs. Guess what? That might encompass 25 to 30 body-worn camera video footage. Guess what? That's all got to be turned over very, very quickly, as does every one of those officers' notes that they make for that crime. So we have seen, and I know the district attorneys have alluded to this, there are more patterns put together this year than we've seen in the past. Complex cases with tons of evidence, mostly that really has nothing to do with the case, that must be turned over very, very soon when it comes to discovery. So just, those are some of the issues. And, you know, Chief Corey really hit it. We overlaid our street robberies with our shootings as far as locations and times. And basically, they just overlay in the same areas of New York City. So we are mindful of that, and we are really focused on robbery reduction in New York City. There's no doubt about it.
All right, Julia Papa, 1010.
Yeah, for Chief Corey, given the success of the summer reduction program, are you considering permanent changes to the way you're deploying manpower to overlap? And we talked about specifically in Pakistan. I know you said more activity in the summertime, but can you lead into that for future reference?
Yeah, so we don't just walk away from anything, right? So our summer strategy largely continues right now, even though Labor Day marks the unofficial end of summer, so that's going to stay in place. And we do this analysis in real time. I mean, we do crime strategy sessions every single day, and we look at what's going on. We need to where we need to shift resources to. So that enhanced deployment, or changing maybe our traditional deployment model, is going to continue. You know, we are very adaptive and to changing crime conditions, both to try to apprehend perpetrators, but also to prevent them. Where we see things starting to flare up, we're going to shift more officers into that area and continue to be agile and nimble and fight crime.
All right, Steve Burns, 880.
Just to kind of piggyback on some of these questions about the shooting reduction versus the big increases in the other major crimes. I mean, what is working with the shooting strategy that is not working with the 6 other major crimes? Why are we seeing success in one area and sort of the decoupling, the opposite in other areas?
I could just say this to you, Steve. I mean, as we talk about violence, we also talk about crimes that are bail eligible. When you talk about other crimes in New York City that continue to spike, it's 2 things. It's fueled by recidivists, namely burglary, namely grand larceny of an auto, and robbery. Those are fueled by recidivists. And a lot of those crimes that these individuals commit and get arrested. Remember, we're talking about a 21-year high in 7 major arrests. Something's not working, right? One of the things that's not working is we continue to let people out who prey on New Yorkers. We're not talking about first-time offenders here, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about people that can continue to get arrested. I'm not talking about what we think they did. These are handcuffs, probable cause, getting arrested, going in front of a judge, walking out the door, and committing another crime against New Yorkers. Those crimes are fueled by recidivism. Those individuals are out walking around the streets of New York City right now.
Dollar Miles, ABC.
Hi, 2 questions, one for Chief Petrie and one for Commissioner. First, do you have data with regard to the same time period pre-pandemic? And where do we stand, 2018, 2019? Is it higher, same? And for Police Commissioner Sewell, good afternoon. What would you say to the average New Yorker? So this has been an extraordinary effort, and there have been, you know, tangible results. When you talk to the layperson on the street and you ask them what their perception of crime is in New York City, and they still have fear, what's your response to those New Yorkers who still have a perception of high crime and they move around with fear inside?
I think we know for most people, perception is reality for them, and that's true. We try to be as visible as possible. We try to make sure we get the information about what we're doing and how we're deploying our resources. I think when people see a police officer, they feel a little bit safer. And I think as we try to put more officers on the street with our civilianization efforts, we hope to make people be able to feel a little bit more secure walking the streets. Obviously, violent crime is reducing, but we have a lot more work to do. Hope is not a strategy. So we certainly have to make sure that we are putting the information out to people with what we are doing as far as initiatives go, and we are doing everything we can to attack the other areas where we have seen the increases, and that's what we're doing.
So as far as the pre-COVID shooting reduction, when we look at, obviously, the years leading up to 2020, you know, the lowest historical years, 17, 18 to 19. And you better believe that we want to get back to those levels. But what we have seen specifically over the past 4 months and this year is when I look at the 10-year pre-COVID shooting number and have an average, and that average is approximately 138 shooting incidents, right? So you take the 10-year pre-COVID shooting average for the year to date, it's about 138 year to date. We're up about 13% or 111 incidents right now to that average. Last year, we were up 30% or almost 250 incidents. So we got a lot of work to do. Commissioner just alluded to that. If we're not sitting up here and saying, you know, hey, you know, pat on the back, but, you know, strides have been made. We will continue to make strides, and we will continue to reduce violence in New York City.
And in the 7 majors, with regard to pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, anything outside of those varsity robberies, are they anything notable that sticks out to you about that?
Well, I can tell you this, again, the arrest data shows that we are arresting individuals more than once for these crimes than ever before. And the vast majority of them, about 80%, are walking around the streets of New York City now. We talk about consequences. There needs to be consequences when it comes to recidivism in New York City.
Yeah, and I think that, the point that Chief LaPetri was making about the arrests and the hard work being made by the officers and the detectives out there in clearing these cases shouldn't be lost. When we're talking about homicide and shooting clearance rates, as well as clearance rates for robberies that are at or near all-time highs, that there have been 361 arrests for murder this year against 290 murders. So we've made more arrests for murder than we've had murder. That doesn't happen. The officers are out there, they're making the arrests. He referenced the 21-year high in index crime arrests. But 21 years ago, we also had 10,000 more index crimes and about 9,000 more police officers, right? So we're making more arrests against fewer crimes with fewer officers. So getting a larger percentage of the people who are committing the crimes, and as the commissioner said, we don't see the immediate reduction because they just get released right back out again and reoffend.
Dean Moses.
So, Commissioner, I feel like we hear time and time again you talk about repeat offenders as an issue. Do you feel like these repeat pleas for help is getting through to the justice system, or is it falling on deaf ears?
We continue these conversations. Obviously, we've had these discussions many times. We sat here with press conferences and interviews and radio. We know what we see every single day on the street, as the chiefs are saying. We will continue to advocate for these changes. I think we do ourselves a little bit of a disservice when we just say bail reform. Criminal justice reform is the total package. And these laws were meant to address disproportionality in the criminal justice system, but a disproportionate number of our victims are people of color as well. So we will continue to push for these changes.
Fowler, Bloomberg.
You guys talk again on recidivism, but I guess my question is, what efforts, you guys talked a lot about the efforts you guys made to reduce violence on the front end. What efforts you guys have, or are you guys rolling out to stop you from getting arrested again? I mean, other than arrests themselves, clearly that's not the
I don't disagree. I think public safety is a shared responsibility. We say that repeatedly. We have a number of youth initiatives that we put out. We work with our community-based organizations of violence interrupters, as you saw when we discussed what happened during Juve and the West Indian Day Parade, that collaboration that we need. We certainly agree that we need partners to help us in this endeavor. We're not going to completely arrest our way out of the position that we're in now. We rely on the programs that we have. We reach out to our community affairs teams go out. We had a very successful summer youth employment program that we had this summer. I think we took in 800 youth during the summer. So we continued that outreach. We continue to focus on deterrence and prevention. It's very important to us, and we're proud of it.
And just a quick follow-up-based question. In terms of clearance rates, I mean, is that something that you guys, would you want to do those? And is that something that you guys?
It is published publicly. It is published publicly by the Offices of Management and Planning. It's on the portal, so it is public. Now, some people have a problem understanding it, so that's probably a conversation between me and you at another time. But, when it comes to shooting arrests and shooting clearances, I will tell you, again, we look at almost 60% of our shootings this summer have an arrest attached to it or a wanted person. That's look, we would love to be 100%, but we're not. We continue to evolve, but 60% is something that, I don't think we should be ashamed of.
All right, we're gonna take two more. John Doyle, CBS.
Chief Essex, you spoke earlier about some open cases over the summer. I just want to ask about yesterday, the 4-6 weeks for the shooting of a basketball game that might have involved a gang dispute, and was it apparently some victim destruction?
Yeah, that occurred in June. I think it was Sunday night in June of the basketball game up in Nelson Avenue. A female, 25 years old, watching her brother play basketball, and there was shots fired, and she was struck, and I think she succumbed to her injuries yesterday, passed away. Totally innocent female watching her brother play basketball. That's still an active investigation, but what we did observe on video is members of rival gangs on the scene, and we're still tracking that video, and hopefully we'll have a successful conclusion to that case.
All right, this will be our final question. Morales?
Two things I wanted to ask. Do you have any statistics regarding crimes, whether they're violent or any breakdown committed by undomiciled individuals? And just broadly, when we talk about violence interrupters in terms of gun violence, as you were talking, you were sort of thinking, like, is there any initiative done by the department now to apply that same logic to, say, robberies and grand larcenies? Since you already know who those folks are, they're already being rearrested, is there any way to, the same way you would do violence interruption or try to head off the gun violence of the past, is there any method to try and do that as a way to get around it? Because I know that we always talk about how this relates to courts and all that, but since that's not, since that is what it is there any plan to do something else?
Yeah, so there's a number of initiatives that we have with at-risk youth that involve community-based organizations and faith-based and nonprofits, very similar to the city's crisis management system. Probably unsurprisingly, that many of the same people who were at risk for gun violence are also the same people that we're talking about that are at risk for committing robberies and other violent crimes. So they are engaged. We do a weekly call with the crisis management system, and we provide them with information on what we're seeing, the groups that we're seeing, and try to get them to engage. And then again, in each locality, so precinct-wise, neighborhood-based organizations that have relationships with the precinct, where the precinct will steer those at-risk youth, ideally before they start going down the wrong path, when they see that somebody is kind of starting to head that direction. So before they get involved with the justice system, that we're able to redirect them, connect them with someone positive. The commissioner mentioned the 800 summer youth that we took here in the police department. That's not citywide. Citywide, that number was in the thousands. And then on the other side, when somebody first has contact with the criminal justice system, there's a number of steps that we take. Our youth coordination officers go out. They engage with the family. They provide the family with contacts for different services, resources that are available to help them and try to steer this child, all too often a young man, back on the right path again. So there's a number of those things that we do take advantage of.
Has it worked so far in your
It's hard to measure a negative, right? But I can speak from personal experience that I had, in my prior assignments, I had a number of youth who were either at risk or were committing felonies at a very young age. And we were able to get them intervention, and they did turn around and stay in school and stop committing crime and become productive.
And Mark, just, sorry, I was just going to answer the other question about the property crimes and the robberies. First of all, we, in addition to CompStat every week, which the majority of the 3 hours is focused on street-level crime, namely robberies. In addition to that, there is a property crime stat that we have, in addition to CompStat, focusing on grand larcenies and burglaries, and a lot of it is, unfortunately, focusing on parolees and recidivists who commit crimes in the area with the same modus operandi, who might have just been released from prison or might have just been arrested and released. In addition to the borough commander of each patrol borough doing the same thing, in addition to the precinct commander doing the same thing at a local level. So we are absolutely focused on reducing index crimes in New York City.
All right, thank you everyone for your time and attention.
Thank you.